The fence post hit the ground hard enough that the whole frame shuddered, and I knew, just from the feel of it coming up through the driver, through my shoulders, down into my boots, that I'd bent it. 30 years ago, I could feel when a post was going to bend before it went down. You'd know from the first strike. Now I don't know until the damage is done. I stood there holding the post driver. It's heavy, maybe 15 pounds, and my hands were already shaking from the first 3 hits. And I looked down at the post. The tip was bent maybe a ½ inch, which meant it was garbage now, $7 shot, and I didn't have $7 to waste. The sun was just past noon, hot enough to make the air shimmer over the flatland. I was sweating through my shirt, and the sweat was salt cold in the creases of my neck. My back was already seizing up from bending and lifting, and I had maybe another 4 hours of daylight before it got dark enough that I couldn't work. I'd been doing this, putting in fence posts, for the Garrett Ranch for 18 years. 18 years of mornings like this one, where you come out knowing exactly what the day is going to ask of you, and you go and do it. Steady. Not fast, but steady. That was worth something, or it had been. 3 years ago, Garrett stopped thinking it was worth anything. I drove the bent post back out of the hole. That took another 5 minutes, and my shoulders felt like they were made of broken glass by the time it came free, and I walked back to the stack of new posts I'd hauled out this morning. The sun beat down on the back of my neck. My boots raised dust that hung in the still air like smoke. I was 62 years old, and I was starting to believe what people kept telling me, that I was finished. The place where I was staying was a boarding house, about 2 miles from Garrett's ranch. It wasn't much. A room about 12 feet square. A narrow bed with a straw mattress that had gone flat years ago. A window that looked out onto the back fence, and the chicken yard beyond. But it was clean, and it was cheap. And it was the only place in town that would still rent to a man my age, with no prospects past the next paycheck. I rode back there that afternoon around 4, because my back had seized up bad enough that I couldn't bend to dig anymore. 3 posts in a day when I used to do 15. That was what I'd become. The owner, Mrs. Hendricks, was in the kitchen when I came through. She was a woman in her 70s, built solid, with a face like old weathered wood. She didn't judge people. She also didn't talk unless she had something to say. "Letter came for you," she said, nodding toward the small table where the mail was left. I picked it up. It was from my sister in Denver. I hadn't written her in 6 months, but she wrote me about once a month. It usually said the same things. "Come stay with us. You can't do this forever. You're getting too old to be living like this." She was right about all of it. That was the problem. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the envelope anyway, and read the same things I always read. My brother-in-law had a friend who might need help with something. Not clear what. There was a spare room. They weren't going anywhere. I was family. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope and set it on the shelf above the bed with all the others. My back hurt. My hands ached. I was running on maybe $200 in savings, and it was getting toward the season when the ranch work dried up. Winter was coming, and I didn't have a plan for it. I lay down on the flat mattress and stared at the ceiling, and tried not to think about what a man my age does when the work runs out. The next morning, I was working on the same stretch of fence. The post I'd bent yesterday was still sitting in the dust where I'd pulled it. A reminder. I was more careful this time, reading the ground better, letting the driver do the work instead of muscle driving it, listening to the feel of it coming up through my hands. I didn't hear her approach until she was almost at the fence. "That one's going to go straight," she said. I turned, and there was a woman standing maybe 15 feet back, holding the reins of a chestnut mare. She was past 50, maybe 55, maybe 60, it was hard to tell, with gray threading through dark hair that was pulled back simple under a good felt hat. She wore a man's riding coat, weathered canvas work pants, and boots that had seen real use. Everything about her said she knew what she was looking at. "You working for Garrett?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "How long?" 18 years. She was quiet for a moment, just looking at the fence. At the posts already in, at the ones waiting to go, at the stretch of raw earth where the old fence had been. "He's selling the place, you know," she said. I didn't know. Garrett hadn't said anything about selling. "Selling to who?" I asked. "Me. I closed on it 3 days ago." She shifted her weight, and the mare shifted with her, patient. I'm Eleanor Voss. I bought this and the section east of here. Both places need work. A lot of work. I turned back to the fence post I'd just set. It was straight. I could tell by the way it sat, the way the weight of it settled into the ground. I'm looking for someone to do that work, she said. Fencing, gates, barn repairs, buildings that need fixing. I've got 30 acres in bad shape, and I can do some of it myself, but I need someone who understands what they're doing. I looked at her again. I'm not fast. I can't do what I used to do. I know. I watched you work yesterday from the ridge. You're careful. You don't do things twice. Garrett's letting me go next week. Says he's consolidating. Doesn't need as many hands anymore. I know that too. She handed me a card. Actual printed card. Not something written down. Eleanor Voss. Voss Ranch. Come see me when you're ready. I'm the next section east. You'll see the gate. She turned the mare and rode off without waiting for an answer. Moving easy. The kind of person who's comfortable on a horse. I stood there holding her card. The sun was climbing higher. I had maybe 4 more hours of good light before my back seized up completely. I drove another post, and this time, I paid attention to the feel of it. Garrett let me go on a Thursday. He did it on the porch of the main house, and he did it quick. Said he was consolidating, didn't need as many hands, appreciated my years of work, and there was a month's severance if I had anything still owed out. Turns out I didn't. I'd been paid daily for the last 3 months, because he'd seen this coming. I rode back to the boarding house and packed what I had, which wasn't much. Most of what I owned could fit in 2 saddlebags. A man my age doesn't accumulate things, or he does, but they don't matter. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while and thought about Eleanor Voss. Thought about what it would mean to work for a woman. Thought about showing up somewhere when you've already been counted out by the only place you've worked in nearly 2 decades. But I also thought about winter coming, and the $200 getting smaller, and the boarding house rent coming due next month. I folded up the letter from my sister and put it in my pocket instead of leaving it with the others, just in case. In the morning, I saddled up the mare I'd been riding for 8 years. A good animal, sound, nothing fancy, and I rode east. The Voss place was in worse shape than I'd realized from a distance. The gate to the main road was hanging crooked on one hinge, the fence around the paddock was collapsed in 3 places, and the barn needed a new roof. The main house was old but solid, painted once probably 15 years ago. Eleanor was in the paddock when I rode up, working on a section of fence with a sledgehammer. She didn't stop when she saw me. She finished driving the post she was working on, straight, clean, and then she set the hammer down and came over. "I didn't know if you'd come," she said. "Didn't have anywhere else to go." She nodded, like that was an honest answer, which it was. "I pay $4 a day, 6 days a week. Room in the bunkhouse if you want it. It's clean, and there's a stove. Or you can board in town if you'd rather. Breakfast at 5, work starts when the sun breaks clear." "When do I start?" "You've started," she said. The bunkhouse was small but better than the boarding house room. It had a real bed with a good mattress, a stove, a table, and a window that looked out over the paddock toward the mountains. There were blankets and a kerosene lamp. It was clean. My first morning, Eleanor was already working when I came out. She'd been up before dawn marking the fence line that needed the most urgent repair. She showed me the work without any preamble, just pointed at the posts that were rotted through, the wire that had rusted until it was brittle, the sections where the whole structure was sagging. "We'll start with the north fence," she said. "It's the longest, but it's also the one that protects the best pasture. 40 posts, maybe more when we get into it. I'll work on the east side, you work on the west. We'll meet in the middle." That's how it was. No talk about my age, no comments about how slow I was, no reassurance. Just work. The first week, I was in pain most of the time. My back hadn't done this kind of labor in 3 years. It had gotten soft. The Garrett place had been mostly maintenance work, steady but not heavy. This was different. This was digging, lifting, driving, bending, repeating. On the 4th day, I had to stop in the early afternoon. My back seized up completely, the kind of seize where you can't straighten, can't move, just have to stand there breathing and waiting for it to release. Eleanor saw it happen and came over with water and didn't say anything, just waited. When I could move again, I said, "I'm slowing you down." "You're moving," she said. "That's all I need right now." By the end of the second week, my back had stopped seizing up during the day. I still paid for it in the evenings, in the stiffness that made it hard to move around the bunkhouse. But during working hours, it was better. Eleanor worked different than I did. She was faster, but not aggressive about it. She'd work hard for a stretch and then ease off and do the detailed work, the wire work, the small adjustments that made the fence tight and true. We didn't talk much while we worked, but there was a rhythm to it, a sense that we were making something solid together. On the afternoon of the 17th day, we drove the last post on the north fence. The sun was halfway down, and the light was turning golden across the pasture. Eleanor came around from her side and looked at the fence. Really looked at it, walking the whole length. I stood and watched her do it, and I realized I was holding my breath. She came back and stood beside me. "It's good work," she said. "You did most of it." "I did my part," she said. "You did yours. That's how it's supposed to be." We stood there for a moment, looking at what we'd made. "There's whiskey in the house," she said. "And I made stew. We should eat something." The house was warm, lit by a good fire in the main room. Eleanor poured 2 fingers of whiskey into real glasses and handed me one. It was good whiskey, expensive, the kind you don't see much. We sat at a table made of thick wood, scarred from use, and she ladled stew into bowls. "My husband was a man who knew things," she said, not looking at me. "About business, about shipping, about the kind of work that happens in buildings, on paper. For 30 years, he was very good at what he did. Made decent money. We had a good life." She paused to eat some of the stew. Then something shifted in him. He got afraid that he wasn't going to be good at what he did anymore. And instead of just accepting that, the way you do, the way any reasonable person does, he decided that if he wasn't excellent, then he was finished. He couldn't bear the idea of being ordinary, couldn't bear being anything less than exceptional. She set her spoon down. One morning, I woke up and he wasn't there. He'd gone out in the dark, and he'd finished his own story. Left me a note that said he was sorry, but he couldn't do it anymore. I didn't know what to say. I finished my stew. "I was angry for a long time," she said. "Angry at him for choosing that. And then I got sad. And then I decided that I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life in a house that remembered him dying. So I came back here. This was where I was a girl. This was before I knew about disappointment." She looked at me for the first time. "The man I bought this place from was a man like my husband. Good man, strong man, but he'd decided he was finished. The land was finishing with him," he said. "Everything on it was too much. He sold it to me for less than it was worth, because he just wanted to be done with it." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because yesterday, I watched you work when your back was bad. I watched you stop, breathe, and keep going. Not because you didn't notice the pain, you felt it. But you didn't let it decide who you are. You just kept going." She poured more whiskey into both our glasses. "My husband was exceptional until he couldn't be. I need a man who's willing to just be steady." I stayed. I moved my things from the boarding house and brought them to the bunkhouse. Mrs. Hendricks didn't say much, just smiled a little when I paid what I owed and said I was moving on. The work continued. East fence next, which was smaller but in worse condition. Then the barn roof. Then the gates. 3 of them, all needing rebuilding. Eleanor's horse needed a new stall. The water trough needed sealing. It was the kind of work that never ended, the kind of work that could keep a man busy for years. Somewhere in the middle of October, we were working on the big gate to the north pasture. I was building the frame, and Eleanor was preparing the hinges. It was a good day, cool but sunny, and we were ahead of schedule. I was measuring the frame for the final time when Eleanor came and stood beside me. "I need to tell you something," she said. I set the measuring tape down. "When I came to find you on the Garrett place," she said, "I'd been trying to hire someone for 3 months. Someone who could do this work. Nobody would come. Nobody wanted to work for a woman alone. Or they said yes and didn't show up. I was starting to think about selling this whole place and going back east to stay with my sister. Starting to believe that some things don't work out, no matter what you want." She was looking at the gate frame, not at me. I drove out to Garrett's place that day, not really expecting anything. just trying one more time, and I saw you standing there, looking at that bent fence post, like it had wronged you personally, and you didn't look defeated. You looked pissed off. I almost laughed. You looked like a man who wasn't going to accept something being wrong just because it was hard to fix. And I thought, there. That's the man I need. She turned and looked at me. But it turned out that wasn't what I needed at all. What I needed was a man who could do the work. And what I wanted, she paused, what I've wanted for the last 3 months, watching you work, watching you be steady and real, and not pretend to be something you're not, is something different. She reached over and took the measuring tape from my hand and set it on the frame. If you want to stay, she said, you can stay, not as hired help, as the man I want to build a life with, if that's something you'd consider. The afternoon light was moving down toward evening. The mountains were starting to turn blue with distance. I could see the fence we'd built, the gates we'd fixed, the barn with its new roof, all the solid things we'd made together. I want to, I said. She held out her hand, and I took it. Her grip was strong, steady, real. Then we'll keep going, she said. Straight. We didn't make it official quick. Eleanor wasn't a woman for rushing into things, and I wasn't either. Winter came on, and we shut down the heavy outdoor work and focused on the barn, weatherproofing it, fixing the roof completely, getting it ready for spring. We worked together most days, and in the evenings, we sat by the fire and talked. She told me about her childhood here, about a girl who'd run wild on these mountains before she'd married and moved to the city. I told her about my years with Garrett, about the men I'd worked with, about the slow decline that happens when you start to lose your strength, and nobody bothers to tell you that it's all right. In November, she asked me to marry her. Not romantic, not on one knee. Just one evening while we were sitting by the fire, she said, we should get married. It'll make things simpler. All right, I said. We got married on a cold day in December, just the two of us in front of the judge in town. It wasn't fancy. Didn't need to be. Spring came early that year. By March, we were planning the new fences, the paddock expansion, the summer work. I was already thinking about next year, and the year after that. Not thinking about getting older, or running out of strength, or being finished. Just thinking about the work, and the woman beside me, and the quiet, solid reality of a man and a woman building something together that would hold against the weather and the seasons and time. One afternoon in April, when the grass was coming back and the aspens were just starting to green, we were riding out to check the fences. Eleanor was on her chestnut mare, and I was on mine, and we were moving easy along the ridge where you could see both ranches stretching out below. Do you ever think about what would have happened? Eleanor asked, if I hadn't stopped at that fence? Sometimes, I said, I think I would have gone to Denver. Stayed with my sister until she got tired of having me around, then probably just gotten smaller and smaller until I disappeared. And now? Now I'm standing here, I said, with a woman who sees me, with work that matters, with a home. She reached over and took my hand, there on the horse, moving side by side along the ridge. They said you were finished, she said. All those people who gave up on you, but I knew better the moment I saw you. How? I asked. Because, she said, a finished man wouldn't have cared that the fence post was bent. A finished man would have left it as is. You were so far from finished that you didn't even know it yet. We rode on in silence, hand in hand, moving toward the afternoon and whatever came next. The fence we'd built was still there, still straight, still holding, and I understood, finally, what it meant to be seen, not as the man I'd been, or the man people expected me to become, but as the man I actually was, steady, real, still useful, still needed, still here, still going.